first team that he had started out with, which obviously so far was easily his best team, the 2019 team, which is a team I think if you look closely at it, didn't have very many flaws. Was about as complete a team as you can find. I mean, it had a really good offensive line. It had a running back that ran for 2,000 yards. It had a quarterback that threw for over 40 touchdowns. It had a great defensive line, and it had a really good secondary. I think it actually had the best defensive player in college football that year. And I think that's proof that you don't have to sacrifice. I see some of these folks saying that, well, you concentrate too much on this area. You don't concentrate enough on that area. Well, I mean, I think in college football to win, I think you have to build a complete team. In fact, I think your ability to build a complete team is a lot greater in college football, certainly is in the NFL, because you don't have a salary cap worry about. Because recruiting, you can stockpile recruits and you can build up a fairly complete roster in college football, whereas you really can't in the NFL. I mean, even if you take a look at Kansas City, who won the Super Bowl, they had some flaws in some areas. I mean, that was not a team that was stacked at every single position, but I think in college you can build a more complete team, and I think that's the one thing Day had his first year is he had a very, very complete team. That was an offense that could run it, that could throw it, and they had a great defense to go along with it. I think what's happened to him is a couple things since then. I think some staff changes have hurt him. I do think some recruiting misses have hurt him, in particular in the secondary. I talked about how bad that secondary was a year ago. And I think that's obviously, when you play a really good football team, your weaknesses will get exposed. And that's exactly what's happened. And it actually happened the last 2 years, even against lesser teams before they played the last game of the year. And, we probably as Ohio State fans should have seen those warning signs before that game happened. And I think that first thing I thought, as far as staff goes, Mark, I didn't think he expected to lose Jeff Hafley as his defensive coordinator after 1 year at Ohio State. I think he had thought that he was going to keep Jeff Hafley for more than 1 year. And he did a really good job on that defense. Although, I think the 2019 defense and the job he did was more about the Jimmies and Joes more than him about him being a great coach. It's easy to be a really good coach when you have guys like Chase Young and Jeff Okudah and guys like that, is basically the long and short what I'm saying. But there's no doubt he was a better defensive coordinator than Kerry Combs. And it remains to be seen, how good Jim Knowles is going to be. And that gets me to my point. I think that's really where Day's future lies, is how much Knowles can improve this defense in the upcoming years.
Ryan Day's got the offense locked down. Not that it's perfect, but yeah, the defense has to get back to championship level play. And maybe there was just too much of an assumption from some that Jim Knowles would be the savior. I didn't watch enough Oklahoma State football to evaluate their defense from year to year, nor did I anticipate that their defensive coordinator was going to coach at Ohio State to do so. But the last defense he coached at Oklahoma State was obviously what Ohio State fans were hoping to see, that level of production and airtight play. I didn't know that their philosophy at Oklahoma State during that time in which they were a top 5 defense the season before he came to Ohio State was to give up 5 and 6 busted plays or big plays in a game. But that's kind of a phrase that's haunted Jim Knowles to a certain extent. But absolutely, he's the guy. He's the guy on the spot. The other side of the ball is proven. It's either going to be extremely good or it's going to be prolific.
Well, I would say he did show some improvement, but all I think he did from 2021 to 2022 is trade slightly better defensive line play, I think much better linebacker play for awful secondary play. And I think that's what happened. Yeah, they did get better defensive line play and better linebacker play, but they got even worse secondary play than they had in 2021. And where did that show up? It showed up in the last 2 games of the year when they gave up big passing plays for touchdowns.
Yeah, and And Georgia's really the only team that they played that had what you could consider to be a top-notch passing attack. Michigan just made obvious throws. Uh, Michigan did not carve them up through the air, but they had breakdowns, and Michigan was not a great passing attack with any kind of wide receiver core that was that threatening. But against that secondary, that's what we saw.
Right. Right, exactly. When you can't make a tackle at the sideline, when you get beat on a double move and a receiver's so wide open, he's fielding a punt. And, then you get caught looking into the backfield and you let a receiver run wide open down the field. You know, big plays happen. And, that's oftentimes, where those breakdowns come into play and what leads to big plays.
It's so easy to be critical, obviously, not playing the game and just watching it. But when your responsibility is a defensive back, I would even think for selfish reasons that you would guard against the pass until you knew for sure that it was a run, that you would play it safe. But then even on top of that, that you would play the defense that you're assigned to play. But that's not just Ohio State's issue. But yeah, defensive backs taking the bite on the running play, and yes, leaving guys loose in the secondary. I never really understood that.
Yeah. I mean, that's how you give up 3 pass plays of over 40 yards for touchdowns. So, I mean, I will say to the offensive side of the ball, and I make a comparison to Day's best team because one of the things we do in a comparison sport is we compare athletes to athletes, but also teams to teams, and you always want to compare to when he had his best team. And as I mentioned earlier, the best thing about his best team is they had a really well balanced offense. And as I mentioned to you, I think a time before, I think that's the other key you know, going forward that they didn't necessarily have this year is they did not have that desired balance. I think partly due to injuries that they had at the running back position. And I think that's really the key to this season is getting back to establishing a balanced offense, an offense that can run it and throw it equally well, because that's the desired offense is an offense that's balanced. I mean, everybody wants to be able to be, 250 to 250. Urban used to talk about this year ago. I mean, I think right now in today's day and age of football, it's more like 300 to 200, 300 to the pass, 200 to the run, which is basically what they had in 2019 with Fields throwing the ball and Dobbins, running it.
And I do think that we can get fooled by just leaning on the statistics. And I love stats, but they've got to be taken into context because these Ohio State teams, and this one in particular, was not nearly as effective running the ball as the J.K. Dobbins team in 2019. I'm guessing, I'm pretty sure the statistics aren't that much different, but their talent advantage, obviously, in 8 to 9 to 10 games is so great that it really doesn't matter. They're going to have, unless they have just a really bad year running the football, 9 out of 10 years, they're going to rack up the kind of yardage that they want to rack up in most of those games. But it's the 1 or 2 games that they could do it with J.K. Dobbins and that line in 2019 versus what we've seen the last couple seasons, and especially last year. And much of that had to do with, I would hope, the physical status of the 3 backs, the 2 backs in particular, but they couldn't run against the better defenses.
Right. Yeah, I mean it's also a little bit more, and they did try to make a commitment in certain games to running the ball, but I think you have to have healthy running backs, and I think sometimes he wasn't always playing the best guy, and a lot of fans had quarrels about that towards the end of the year. Maybe using Hayden a little bit more would have been a positive, especially in that last game of the year. Especially after he had back-to-back over 100 yard rushing games. So, and it'll be interesting to see, obviously, health and then how the carries are divvied up this year.